was on the other desk. I was helping someone else out with some stuff.
Okay. Just relax. I'm just testing and getting things organised. We've still got another couple of minutes
Okay.
before we start. I've got, what have I got? I've got 2 minutes to 4 or 2 minutes to 6 your time. Are you at work or have you gone home?
No, I'm at work. It wouldn't give me enough time to go home, so I'm just taking it from work.
Yeah. How's
But that's okay.
how's things over in Sydney?
Good. I mean, pretty busy at the moment. At the while, we have the organizational days coming up next week.
Yep.
There'll be 2 days of that, so I guess a lot of planning around that. And again, it's good. I mean, in terms of programs, things pretty busy at the moment with delivering, booking, delivering.
Okay. Now, I'm going to invite questions during the webinar. During the webinar when I'm presenting, I'm going to turn everyone's microphone off, and not everybody does have microphones.
Yeah.
If you want to ask a question, do you know how you can raise your hand? There's a little tool pad there.
Okay. Let me have a quick look.
And if you raise your hand, you should be able to type in a little question. And you just say, oh,
I've used webinars before, but there's always some different programs. Yeah, I can see the hand. Yeah.
yeah. So if you click that,
Yeah.
that should show me.
Oh, let me click on that. Yeah.
Yep, no, I've got your hand up now. I can see that. So that'll show me that you've got a question. Now, do you want to type the question, or are you happy for me to open up your microphone and you ask the question?
Yeah, that would be okay.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll do it that way. So I'll just put your hand down now. So I'll pause for questions at 3 or 4 spots in the webinar, but also if you want to rush in, or if you want to get started, then I mean, if you want to ask a question other than that, just put your hand up and then I'll open up your microphone.
Okay.
Okay, so other than that, I'll put you on mute just in case there's background noise.
Yeah, there's a button here I've got that says mute me. So is that?
Yeah, and you might want to type, or you might want to do other things as well. So, okay,
Right.
We'll start in a minute or so. Just I'll mute your microphone.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful. Okay. We'll make a start. It's gone 4 o'clock in Western Australia, which means it's 6 o'clock in the eastern cities. And welcome to the webinar this evening. The webinar is about responding to questions from the audience. And it's often one of the most difficult things. People struggle with public speaking and presenting, and then when they do start presenting and they get the confidence to speak to seminars and conferences, one of the things that worries them, one of the things in the back of their minds is the question time. How do I go responding to questions? What if I get a question I can't answer? What if someone gets angry or asks a contentious question of me? How do I handle those situations? And of course, if you are good at responding to questions, what that does is that gives you credibility. The audience, the listeners can see, wow, this person really does know their subject. They're across a range of issues. They're very credible. The other thing it does, it gives you that sensation or that appearance of reliability. So you'll be asked to speak again. The conference organizer, the meeting planner will be pleased, and even the audience will think, I will go to that person the next time I have a need for information in this area. They're credible and they're reliable. And of course, the third thing it does for yourself is it gives you confidence. if you are good at responding to questions, you can put that little bit of worry, that little bit of nervousness below the line when you do your next round of public speaking. So today's webinar is about giving you some skills, not all the skills, but certainly some skills for responding to questions from the audience. Now, the way we're going to do this, I'll present a little bit of material and I'll invite questions, but also if there's something I say that you do have a question, then please ask. Ask by raising your hand. You can raise your hand, you can type into the question bar, or you can raise your hand, and if you've got a microphone, I will open up your microphone and you can answer the question. Most of you know me. I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and I travel Australia-wide. I'm based in Perth, hence the webinar is at 4 p.m. But I do webinars at all different times so that people can do it in work times and in evening times. My passion is helping people find their voice, helping you find your voice so that you can confidently and effectively get your message across and your point of view across to others, to the people that need to hear. So this is one of the things that I'm really extremely passionate about. Those of you who don't know me and haven't been to my workshops yet, my background is that I'm a person who stutters. If you've seen the movie The King's Speech, you'll have an idea of what it's like. Prince Albert, King George VI, who struggled with his stutter. I guess that was much of my life, and moving into public speaking training and coaching, I've got the ability to help people become more confident, and that's my unique background. You can go to public speaking training and you can secure public speaking coaches who've got radio backgrounds, who've got school teacher backgrounds, who've got drama backgrounds. So I am not that person that's born with the gift of the gab. I've had to earn my ability to speak. So that's where I come from. And we've just had another person join us. So we are going to have questions during the presentation, and I notice you don't have a microphone, so please put your hand up and we will answer the question. Okay, the agenda for today. I've just been through a little bit of an introduction on myself, and I've also been through a bit of an introduction on the importance of being able to answer questions. It gives you the credibility, it gives you the confidence, it gives you the reliability. And even when we do become confident to speak, it could be that we worry about the question time, the question and the answers. So this is what today's webinar is about. I'm going to start off with some general tips for responding to questions from an audience. I'm then going to give you an eloquent little model that if you use this model and remember it, you'll be able to respond to questions very effectively. This model is just one of many models you'll find on the internet if you want to search for models for responding to questions. This model won't work in every situation. I wouldn't use the model I'm going to teach you to respond to questions around a meeting table with 4 or 5 people. It's more for when you've got a seminar of 10, 50, 100, 1,000 people. And finally, what if you don't know the answer? What are some techniques, some strategies that you can use if you don't know the answer to the question? So that's the agenda for this webinar, for this 1 hour. And as I said, please ask questions by raising your hand and I'll open up your microphone, or raise your hand and type the questions in. Okay, some general tips for responding to questions from the floor, responding to questions from the audience. And we've just had someone else join us. So I've just done the introduction and we're going into general tips for responding to questions from the audience, from the floor. You're delivering a seminar, you might have 10, 15, 20 people in the room, you might have 500 people in the room. The first thing, preparation is always key. Preparation in knowing your audience, knowing what their expectations are. Are there going to be people in the audience that are going to be against what you're saying? Are there going to be people in the audience that know more than you? And this is quite often the case, especially when you're speaking at conferences to your peers and you've done some research or you're presenting on a new model. There will be people that have worked in that same area. So looking at the circle up the top on my PowerPoint slide, preparation is indeed the key. And those of you who have been to my workshops know that one of my favourite sayings is prior preparation prevents pathetically poor performance. The more preparation you do, the better. And I'll talk about some of the preparation you can do as we go through the slide. The second thing you can do with questions is set the rules up front. As you're doing the housekeeping for your presentation, let the audience know how you are going to handle, how are you going to take questions during your presentation. In my workshops, I invite questions as you go. In this webinar, I've invited questions as you go, but I've also got 3 key spots where I'm going to stop and pause and give you time to raise your hands or to type your questions. Set the rules up front. If you've got a short seminar, you might set the rule up front and ask everyone to hold your questions towards the end. Towards the end of my presentation, I've got 10 minutes set aside for questions, and if everyone's okay with that, I would like to hold those questions till then. I understand I might say something that will generate questions. Please note it down, or please remember that. And also get agreement with the audience. So is everyone okay with, I have a 10-minute question and answer session towards the end? Get them to nod their head. That's one rule you might set. Another rule that you might set, especially if you're speaking on a difficult topic or a contentious issue, or you're speaking in a room where you know there'll be people that'll be a little bit angry or a little bit against you. One of the rules you can say is, we've got limited time for questions. It's quite a big audience and I'll know there'll be lots of questions. Can I make a rule up front that 1 question per person, please? Can we all agree to 1 question per person? Because I know I want to give as many people a chance as possible. And get the nod of heads, and you've set the rules. Now, later on, when you go into your question and answer session, and somebody who may not agree with you asks you a question, and you say, and you answer it to the best of your ability, and they come back at you and say, look, but can I have another question? Then you say, look, excuse me, if you don't mind, can I move on to, there's other people with questions. I do value your question. Please come and see me at the end of the seminar. I need to move on. We did agree. So by setting the rules up front, you have got some control over your question and answer session. It's your gig. You're the presenter. You can set the rules for how you're going to handle questions. Are you going to take it through the seminar as you go, through your presentation as you go, or you're going to hold questions to the end? The next thing is to anticipate tricky or angry questions. And once again, this comes down to your preparation, knowing a little bit more about the audience, knowing your topic. Is your topic contentious? Is your topic going to create some anger? One of the best people I've seen responding to questions on television is the retired General Colin Powell from the United States Army. And I read recently that he had a team of about 50 people that were anticipating every possible question that could be asked when he went to give his press conferences, when he went to give his updates on what was happening in Iraq. We don't have that team of people to help us, but they would anticipate every question and then work out an answer, work out how they could respond. So you know when people are going to be angry, you know when people are going to ask you those questions. Anticipate them and have some answers prepared. Don't be caught by surprise when someone asks you that question. You should have been able to anticipate it. Of course, over time, you will have a bank of common questions. You know the questions that are going to be asked most often of you. So have a list of those questions and the responses. And the responses will change over time as new material, new research, new ways of dealing with problems, new departments, new services for people with disabilities become available. Your answer to those bank of common questions will change. So do have that bank of common questions. The other thing is, moving on to the next circle, moving on to the next one over here, as you get a new question, and you know that's the question you hear for the very first time, add that question to your bank of common questions so you only ever get caught on that new or that unusual question once. I got asked a question because one of the things I talk about is being able to plug and play. And plug and play means carry on presenting regardless of circumstances. If the power goes off and you're using PowerPoint, you still need to be able to present. If someone cuts your time in half, you still need to be able to present. It's called plug and play. Someone asked me, they were at a presentation about 14 months ago here in Perth, in fact March 2010, and we had this huge hailstorm. And someone was presenting, an international presenter was on the stage presenting about mental health, and the hailstorm just flooded in and the auditorium was flooding and all of the chairs that weren't being seated in were starting to wash back against the wall and water was dripping in through the ceilings and the glass was broken from the huge hailstorms. And this lady just kept on presenting and people felt that they couldn't leave because she was an international speaker. Peter, what would you do in that circumstance? How would you handle that situation? And of course, one would hope that a hailstorm of that magnitude would be once in a lifetime. But it was a really difficult question and I was caught with my pants down. I really don't know what to do. You're an international speaker. There's not another speaking opportunity. You're on a plane to Sydney as part of your national tour the next day. So don't be surprised by those questions and only be surprised once. So add that unusual, that uncommon, that left field question to your bank of questions so that you never get surprised again. Another thing to do, another golden rule, a general tip with public speaking and questions is don't end with questions. So remember I said about set the rules up front. You might say, I'm going to have a question session towards the end of my speech for 10 minutes, but that shouldn't be your last 10 minutes. What that should be, that shouldn't be the last thing you say. The last thing you'll say should be your conclusion and your take-home message. Do have questions towards the end if that's what you've decided is best, but don't end with questions. If the last thing you do is you conclude, you summarize, and then you say, okay, do we now have any questions? If someone asks you that difficult question, that tricky or that contentious question, or even that angry question, if somebody asks you that and you don't handle it well, and then the time is up and the audience leaves or you leave the platform, the last thing that people remember is the way you struggled or the way you failed to handle that last question effectively. So by bringing your question session slightly forward and not ending with it, you can have that difficult question session. You can have that contentious issue being raised, but then you can say, now my main purpose for being here today is such and such. Or you can summarize by saying, with your call to action, so if you only do one thing today, how are you going to incorporate these new policies into your workplace so that your workplace is a safe environment? Give yourself that 5 minutes to sum up, to nail your take-home message, to roll out your call to action. Don't let your call to action, your final statement, be a difficult question that you failed to respond to effectively. Don't let that happen. Okay. Not a very good question, Mark. I'm going to pause for a moment and allow you to type questions. If you put your hand up and you want to ask me something, I will open up your microphone. So any of those tips, any other questions around responding to questions from the audience at the moment? Yes, Sabrina.
Oh yes, hi. I just wanted to clarify, maybe I missed it, but on the very last point that you were making about obviously the platform with a question. In that regard, how would you, and you're also running out of time, so basically they're pretty much getting you off the platform, and possibly the question they've asked you is quite lengthy, which involves more thorough response. How would you wrap it up? I suppose would you just acknowledge it and give something free or offer to enter on the side, or how would you
okay.
do it? I'm not sure. Sorry if I missed your point.
Okay, thanks, Sabrina. So you've asked me if you're running out of time and you've got questions still coming, how would you wrap it up? And the way I would wrap it up is if there's still questions flowing and questions coming, and I know I have to wrap it up. My timer in my hand is vibrating, so I know I've got 5 minutes left to go, or the MC's holding up a 5-minute sign or whatever. I would quickly answer the last question, and then I would acknowledge there's more questions to come and say, look, but I'm going to end the question session there. And if I've set the rules up front, I can bring them back to my rules up front. I did say it was going to be a short question session. That's all I've got time for. But I will be there at morning tea and at lunch break. Please come and see me also. And as in my introduction, I put my email and my website up on the whiteboard, or I data projected my email. Please email me those questions that I haven't got to today. And I know everyone wants to know the answer, so what I'll do is on my website I'll put all the questions and all the responses to those unanswered questions available on the common page, on my home page on my website. So anyone in the conference who's interested is able to go and find those questions. Now, I must conclude by saying, if you only do one thing today, how are you going to make a difference in your workplace with these policies and procedures? What are you going to do to make sure your workplace is as safe as it can be? So that's the sort of thing that I would do. Another thing you can do is you can say, I value there's still more questions. I will take the questions at morning and afternoon tea time, and I'll respond to them, but I'll also make a note of them, and I'll let the conference organizer who's got all the delegates, if you're a keynote speaker, and I'll get the conference organizer to email you out those unfinished questions and the answers, so that you're not just speaking to one person, you're speaking to the whole audience. And you can do this. You can shut the questions down because you've asked for permission up front. You've said, these are the rules for questions. I'm going to allow 8 minutes towards the end, and then I'm going to have to stop. I know there'll be unanswered questions. Please email me your questions, or please come and see me in the morning tea break. I'll remain behind after the seminar. As a speaker presenter, I will always remain behind, and I'll be the last person to leave. So if you do have questions, you're still welcome to see me in the break. Thanks for your questions, Sabrina. And please, if you have further questions, you can email me as well. No other hands up. Okay. So I've given you some background. What I've got now is a little model. It's an eloquent model for answering questions from the floor, from the table in a seminar. I wouldn't use this model around a meeting room. Say you've got your weekly team meeting for 5 people, but generally it's a really nice, polite, eloquent and effective way of responding to questions. First of all, the first thing you need to do is to repeat the question. Now this serves several purposes. Have you ever been at a seminar where there's a roving microphone for questions? The person up the front asks a question, not waiting for the microphone to come. Or someone with a quiet voice. There is no roving microphone. Someone with a quiet voice asks the question. The speaker, the presenter, hears it and then moves into the answer straight away. And you sitting up the back have got no idea what the question is. That's the first reason for repeating a question. You are really allowing everyone to hear the question. The second thing, it's buying yourself a little bit of time. So as you repeat the question, as I did when Sabrina asked me the question, what I'm really doing is thinking, stacking, racking, organising my options for responding. What it means is I'm not jumping straight into the question and then maybe realising part the way through that there's another way of answering it. And that's too late because I've already started an answer. So it's really buying yourself a bit of time. Another thing, when you repeat the question and you make eye contact with the person who asked the question, if they nod their head up and down, you know you're spot on. If they shake their head left to right, then it could be that you've misinterpreted the question. And Sabrina, I could have misinterpreted your question because the voice quality wasn't brilliant across the internet. The voice over internet protocol wasn't brilliant. I heard you and I think I got the gist of it. Had we been one-on-one, you'd have shook your head side to side and I'd have known to reflect back or ask for clarification. So that's what repeating the question does. The second thing to do is to create relevance for everyone in the room. One of the things I see often, one of the mistakes I notice is people responding to questions just to the asker. And if you've got a room of 100 people and you've spent time building rapport, connecting, building that relationship with the entire audience, and then for the next 2 minutes you deliver a response to someone who's asked an obscure, niched question that really the rest of the audience may not understand, may not even care about. If you do that, you risk losing the rest of your audience. And you've worked so hard to build the rapport. So what I do is I, first of all, make my response relevant to everyone. It's called chunking it up. So it's go to an overview so everyone says, aha, I need to listen to this. Then I will drill down. Then I will narrow my response down and answer the question specifically. Let me give you an example. If you were in a seminar on diabetes, and I know we're all sort of quasi-health workers in one way or another, but diabetes, we're on a seminar on diabetes. And someone asked me a question, Peter, what's my view on that new DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes. And I've just read some obscure medical journal, and the rest of you have not heard of anything about the new DNA nanotechnology. So how am I going to answer that question? Well, that's a great question. I've just been asked what's my view on the new DNA nanotechnology for early diagnosis of juvenile diabetes. And I think that everybody in the room would agree anything that helps us diagnose diabetes in our children, anything that helps us save lives and start early intervention with our kids would be a valuable thing. So that's my chunking it up. It would be great if we could, prevent some of the disease burden in our children with early onset diabetes. My view, now I'm going to drill down, my view on the DNA nanotechnology is it's still very new. There hasn't been enough clinical trials, but it sounds promising. Chunk it up, make it relevant for everyone, then drill down and answer specific. That way you won't lose the audience, because all of a sudden they realise, oh, that could apply to me. That could apply to me. Fairly simple. This is the keep it simple principle. Be concise. Don't go into long-winded answers. Once again, you may lose your audience. The other thing in this model, and another problem I see with people responding to questions, is their eye contact is directed at the questioner only. So the same as not chunking it up and all of a sudden you answer this obscure niche question, this narrow response for one person, losing your audience. If you do eye contact just with the questioner, you could lose your audience also. So the correct procedure is, as you're repeating the question, your eye contact is with the questioner and you're looking for the nod, the frown, the head shaking, just to make sure you've got the question right. From that point on, as you're creating relevance, as you're being concise, as you're answering the question, as you're summarising the question, your eye contact is with everyone, as your eye contact would be when you're presenting the body of your presentation, the majority of your presentation. So first, make eye contact with the questioner, then eye contact with everyone. All parts of the room as you respond and unpack your answer, as you chunk it up to make it relevant, as you then drill it down to specifically answer the question. Eye contact with everyone. Then finally, summarise the answer and look back at the questioner and thank the questioner for their question. Thanks for the question. And from a gesture point of view, and I can't demonstrate the gesture, from a gesture point of view, if you put out one hand with a stop sign, put out one hand in front of you straight and made a hard, harsh stop sign. Now what you do is you do that, but you soften it so your palm's more or less parallel with the ground. Still fingers down, palm down, and just thanks for your question. Thank you for your question. As opposed to, does that answer your question? Because if you haven't answered the question completely 100% to the person's satisfaction, even if you have answered to the best of your ability, they will come back to you and say, no, that doesn't answer my question. I want to know more about this. And all of a sudden, you're into a two-way disagreement, a two-way argument, a two-way conversation with one person in the audience, once again risking losing the rest of your audience. So thanks for your question. Are there any other questions? Now, if you've set the rules up front and the person comes back at you, then you're safe to say, look, excuse me, we did agree one question per person. I need to move on. I notice there are other questions. Now, you're not going to use that thanks for your question closed gesture if you're in a brainstorming session where you're encouraging people, where they may be seeking guidance from you and your response to the question is to guide them. And you might say, are you clear on that now? And when you're trying to milk questions, milk involvement from the brainstorming, from the workshopping audience, you will use an open gesture and an inviting gesture. But the big audience with lots of people, lots of questions that you need to keep on time, that closed gesture and that thank you for your question lets them know that that is the end of that question and you're now moving on to another question. In a small audience, 5 or 6 people, you may not repeat the question because it may seem silly, but I would paraphrase it. Number 1, to buy myself some time, and number 2, once again to seek clarity that you've got the question right. Always be concise. Eye contact, even at a job interview. When someone asks you a question, 3 people in the panel, don't respond entirely to the questioner. Your eye contact needs to be with all 3 people of the interview panel. So that's a nice little model. Repeating the question gives you some time. Make sure everyone in the audience hears it, allows the questioner to nod the head to show that you have got it right. Make it relevant for everyone. Chunk it up. And this is indeed one of the most effective skills and the most difficult skills in the question model. How can I make this relevant for everyone in the room? What's the common denominator that I can chunk it up to? Be concise. Make eye contact with everyone. Yes, one person asked the question, but please include the whole audience in your response. Summarize and do thank the questioner. Let them know that that is the end of the question. Questions? Are there any questions? Put your hand up, type away. I can open up your microphone, or you can type a question in to the question box. No questions. There's the model. Is there any aspect of the model that you would like explained further? Sabrina, fire away.
Me again. Okay. So maybe again using the example you gave on diabetes.
Yes.
The fifth aspect of the model where it says summarize the answer, then thank the questioner. Well, it's quite obvious to thank the questioner, but the summarized bit, for example, what would you say after that? Like you would have given the answer about your view, and then how would you summarize that even further, or whatever it is?
Yep. Okay. So thank you, Sabrina. Sabrina's just asked me, with my example on diabetes, how would I summarise the answer? Bearing in mind I had to chunk it up first. And I guess all of you would like to know what's an easy way to summarise the answer. And my summary would be around what my view is. So the question is, Peter, what's your view on the new DNA nanotechnology for early detection of juvenile diabetes? And that's a great question. And of course, all of you want to know, all of you would agree anything that helps us save lives, helps our kids lead healthy lives would be great. You'd all agree. Section 2 complete. Be concise. I don't know enough about it at the moment. It looks promising. I've seen the journal article. It needs some more clinical control. It needs more clinical trials before it comes out. So I'm eye contacting with everyone. Now I'm going to go back to the person. So my view is it looks promising. The jury's out. We do need some more research at the moment, but it is looking promising. Thank you for your question. So I wouldn't summarise the chunking up bit. I'd only summarise the answer. So I'm now drilling down, because people are going to say, they will link, people that don't know about the DNA nanotechnology, they're going to say, wow, this is going to help our kids. And my summary is going to be, it's looking promising. They can link the two together. Yes, we need more clinical trials and it's early days, but they're linking that to, okay, this is going to help our kids possibly. Any other questions from the other participants? No hands up. And of course I can break my rule and say to Sabrina, does that answer your question, Sabrina? Which, Michelle, I'm going to open up your microphone and feel free to speak, or you may want to type your question. Do you have a microphone?
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi. I suppose I just had a question about those multi-part questions that
Yes.
sometimes people ask. They have a long, sort of convoluted question and then end up saying, yeah, my first question is this, and then the second question is this. I worry in those instances about my own memory. So what are some techniques for dealing with that?
Thank you, Michelle. Brilliant question. Michelle's just asked me, what do you do with those double barrel, those triple barrel, those multi-part questions? And I'm sure all of us do worry about the long, convoluted questions. And even more so, the people that don't get to a question, that just make a statement and sometimes have a bit of a rant and think they may even know more than you. And often with those ones, you don't need to answer the question. And if there's an MC or a chairperson, hopefully they will shut that person down at the right time and say, look, do you have a question? What's your question? Can you get to the point? If you're by yourself, you might have to do that yourself, and that does take a skill. The multi-part question, in repeating the question, this is where you can really help yourself. So if I understand you, you've asked me point 1, and you've also asked me point 2, and you've also asked me point 3, if I understand you correctly, and you get the nod. And just by repeating the 2 parts or the 3 parts of the double, triple barrel question, that should embed some of it in your mind. Or you might also say, okay, that's a fairly convoluted question, and there's multiple parts. What I'm going to do is, okay, if I get you right, the first 2 parts of your question are this and that. Okay, let me answer that first, then I'll get back to you with the last part of the question, and I'll get you to just throw that last part back at me. Okay, now I'm going to create relevance for everyone on those first 2 parts of the question. I might have to answer them as 2 separate questions. Job interviews is a wonderful example where they love to give you two-barreled questions. Can you give me an example of when you've had to use your negotiation skills and it didn't work out as well as you would have liked it to? And if you're in that situation again, what would you do differently to make it succeed? Okay, great question. If you don't mind, I'm going to answer that with 2 parts. So the first bit from you is you want to know an example of when I've used my negotiation skills and they haven't failed and they haven't resulted in the outcome that I wanted. I would go on to answer that, and then I'd go back. Okay, and the second part of your question again was, can you just refresh my memory? I would do something like that. Thanks for your question, Michelle. Not sure how well I answered it. I'm getting older and my mind does struggle with multi-part questions. In an informal workshop environment, I would take a note down. If I can note down 1 or 2 dot points, 1 or 2 bullet points, that gives me a reminder. In a conference as a keynote speaker, that wouldn't look all that professional, and maybe your credibility would go down a little bit if you had to write everything down. Okay, brilliant. Moving on. And thanks, Michelle. Michelle's commented that my answer was spot on. What if you don't know the question? Guys, what if you don't know the question? Several things to do. Number 1, don't bluff or make it up. This is not the time to make up your answer. This is not the time to pretend you know something that you don't know. It's the time to be honest and say, look, I don't really know the answer to that. And it could be due to several reasons. It could be because it's outside of the scope of what you're speaking on. It could be because it's outside of the scope of your expertise. So that new DNA nanotechnology question that I spoke about when I'm talking about mature age onset diabetes and how we can manage our diabetes and, you know, reduce the risk of some of those complications, I might say, look, yeah, I don't work in the pediatric field. I don't know anything about early detection. My expertise is in managing people that have got mature age onset. So look, I do apologise. I can't answer that. That's the right thing to say, but that doesn't mean to say you can't help that person. And if we move on to the next thing, you can agree to find out, but I do have a colleague who's a neonatal endocrinologist. Don't you love that terminology? He's a neonatal endocrinologist. And can I contact him and can I get back to you? In fact, I'm going to get back to all of the audience and I will post that question and the answer within 2 or 3 days on my website. Or I will send the question, brilliant question, and I'll send the answer to the conference organizer and they'll make it available on the conference website, the proceedings of the conference, or they'll email out to all of the participants. I had a wonderful question like that when I was speaking to one of our country senior high schools, and it was to do with liver transplantation, because me as a 50-year-old man who likes a glass of wine and the odd beer, my liver can be split in two. The large lobe can go to an adult with maybe hepatitis C that needs a liver transplant, someone like Darren Hinch who needs a liver transplant. The smaller lobe can go to a baby, an 18-month-old infant that may be born with a genetic disease and needs a liver transplant. So I could save 2 lives if I died and became a liver donor. The question from this 16-year-old was, hey, Peter, when you put that little bit of your liver into a kid, an 18-month-old, what happens? Does that liver grow, or does that kid need another transplant when he becomes an adult? And, you know, if your liver's not all that healthy, what happens? Wow, brilliant question. I don't know that question, but let me find out. I'm going to ring, I will contact my liver transplant surgeon friend who works at Sir Charles Gardner Hospital in Perth, and let me get back to your high school teacher, your head of class, and they'll then bring that answer to all the kids here in the seminar. And the answer was, my liver will be cleansed and it will grow as that child grows in to adulthood. So they don't need another liver transplant as long as, you know, there's no rejection issues. So agree to find out. Ask a colleague in the audience. Don't be afraid. And I sometimes call these two, phone a friend. You know, phone a friend. Look, is there anyone in the audience that's read that new DNA nanotechnology paper? I tend to work in mature age onset diabetes, but I know we've got some people that do work across age groups, and I notice there's a few endocrinologists in the room. Does anyone know the answer to that question? And throw it open. Or anyone in the audience. If it's not a colleague, just anyone in the audience. Does anyone else in the room know that answer? Has anyone seen that paper about DNA nanotechnology? I mentioned earlier on, the question may be out of scope. Now, if the question's out of scope and you continually get questions that you can't answer, it could be that the marketing material, your workshop flyer, your synopsis in the conference program is misleading people. If people are continually coming to your seminars expecting one particular information and not getting it, and questions that are out of scope, continually receiving lots of questions that are outside of your field, that are not about what you're here to speak on, indicates that something's wrong in the scoping. Something's wrong between the audience expectations and what you're delivering. and you may need to look at what's going on in your marketing material. The next thing is, and I've spoken about this, is to follow up and get back to them. Now, to remain credible and to continue building your rapport and your connection with your audience, this is really important, because if you say you're going to find out something and you will get back to them and you don't, your credibility will go down. So do use some of these things and do get back to the audience. So that's a method you can use. If you don't know the answer, it's not the time to bluff it. If it is an answer that you can relate, look, I don't know specifically about that, but I've got an example of a different situation. I think applying this model to your question, which is outside of my expertise, might also work. So let me have a go at that, and this is what I would do in this situation, and then if that works for you in your situation, you know, great, if I can help you. But that's not my area of expertise. So you may want to relate it to something you do know, but then you need to admit that and allow them to draw the parallels rather than you applying the parallels. So there, the three areas I wanted to speak on. Some information you can use to prepare yourself for questions. Some little, the model, the eloquent model that I've been through, and now what to do if you don't know the answer. Any questions? Any questions at this stage? Hands up, and I'll open up microphones. Hands up, type in the question. And we will finish a little bit early. And I know over East you'll appreciate finishing a bit early, and I'm sure in the West you'll appreciate finishing a little bit early. Okay, if you do have any questions, feel free to still put your hand up. I'm in Melbourne on the 26th of May. If you know of anyone interested, I'm doing Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff. This responding to questions is one small segment of my one-day Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff workshop. I'm in Sydney on the 1st of June, and I know I've got some New South Wales people on the webinar. This one in June is the Winning Presentation Skills Workshop, but I'm also there because I'm doing an in-house workshop for an organisation. I'm there on the 30th of June, and that evening, 5:30 to 6:30, I'm doing a coffee cup mentoring session, 5:30 to 6:30 at the Y Hotel. So if you were close by and you wanted to pop along for an hour, that's a free session. And I know, Sabrina, you're already registered, so I look forward to seeing you Monday evening on the 30th of May. And I've got two workshops in Perth on the 3rd and 8th of June. The 3rd is Winning Presentation Skills, and the 8th is Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff. I'll keep you informed when new webinars arrive, and feel free to email me. I chose this topic, but I'd be interested if you've got a particular area you would love to hear a webinar on. Because it's easy to do 1 hour webinar. I just take a little section of my workshops and I put a few slides together and we can have a bit of a chat. I can open up your microphones, and that way you'll develop some skills over and above the workshops that you've attended in the past. So please make use of me. I'm going to shut the webinar now and use some of those tips for responding to questions. Use some of those tips, and please email me if I can be of any further use. That's it for now.